I would like to thank our sponsor, Sound Cultivation, which is dedicated to a system of a rising tide lifts all boats, working at the community level, the state level, and the federal level for advocacy in the cannabis space. I would like to introduce our lunch keynote. In 2013, Evelyn LaChapelle was convicted on 3 charges related to her minor role in marijuana distribution operation. She received 87 months in prison, and she is now utilizing her professional position within the legal cannabis industry to advocate for restorative justice. She is the community engagement manager at Last Prisoner Project and the social impact consultant at Rose Mary Jane, both dedicated to redressing the past and continuing harms caused by the war on cannabis. She serves on the leadership team of Cannabis for Black Lives. Evelyn has built her lifestyle brand, The Weed Lady. Her mission is to create a platform for the formerly incarcerated to find their path into this industry. Her journey in this industry is a story of defeat and victory. She plans to push this brand and industry forward by normalizing cannabis consumption, first with the luxury cannabis essentials and apparel, cannabis delivery, and soon cannabis beverage. Evelyn is in this industry as the Weed Lady. Welcome, Evelyn, please.
Thank you for such an introduction. We've just cut about 10 minutes from the talk. No, you're good. And also, I've never been a keynote. So thank you, Cannabis Alliance, for giving me the opportunity to share with your audience. Thank you, Trey, for making the introduction. I'm such a huge fan of the work that you do. And there's something to be said about speaking to folks while they're eating lunch. In jail, you always want to see the judge after lunch. Before lunch, he's pissed off. So I am even grateful for the opportunity to be addressing you all after you've eaten. So just to reintroduce myself, Evelyn LaChapelle, CEO and founder of 87, doing business as the Weed Lady. Thank you. The 87 does represent the 87 months that I was sentenced to prison for this plant. Is there anyone else in the room ever arrested and or convicted for this plant? See, there's a few hands. I'm not the only one. We've got something in common, a POW of the war on cannabis. It is real. It is forgotten. And I always speak that the prison population is the most unhurt population, although it is a very large population in this country. It's done purposefully. The prisons and the jails are tucked in places that you never see. And so you never have to think about us. You never have to, it's just, we're off the grid, but trust me, we are working. I, for 29 cents an hour, shipped Humvees across the country. That was my prison job. I was the shipping clerk for 29 cents an hour, 8 hours a day. I made sure that Humvees got across the country. That means I had to broker the shipping cost for the Humvees that the other women were painting. I didn't have the muscles to paint Humvees, but I could be a shipping clerk. And so I am always honored at the opportunity to speak because for all of those years, I was unheard. And so the easiest way to tell this story is to just share the timeline in which it happened. So I will start in 2009. I was a junior in college at Loyola Marymount University. My grandparents had spent their money and private schooled me my whole life, shipped me to LA. And I thought I was doing okay for a junior in college when I was asked to deposit cannabis profits into my bank account. Backstory is I grew up in Oakland. Weed is weed. Weed has been in Oakland. I can't make excuses, but the truth is I didn't really think twice. I was like, sure, who cares? I've got so much other things going on. I was expecting my first child and trying to graduate at the same time without anyone noticing that the ship was sinking. And so I did. That was 2009. 2012, I moved home with my 3-year-old. I've divorced her father. I'm restarting my life. I'm pulled over and I find out that there's a warrant for my arrest. And in 2013, October the 18th. So I'm approaching that rough time in my life. I am convicted by a jury with 3 other co-defendants for depositing those profits. So it was money laundering, structuring, and the intent to distribute over 100 kilos. All I did was deposit profits. I never even seen this weed. I never even smelled this weed. But here I am convicted and on my way to jail. My daughter at the time had just turned 4. Her birthday's coming up October the 8th. She had just turned 4. And so now I'm in North Carolina sitting in a county jail. To give some context to it, California legalized medicinally in 1996. So again, right, we have already acknowledged that this plant is not harmful. October of 2013, I'm convicted. December 2013, Washington legalizes. And I am newly sitting in a county jail on the other side of the country. And for 2 years, I'm awaiting sentencing. I don't see my daughter. And I'm forced really to have phone conversations with the 4-year-old. And that goes on for 2 years. So I'll skip to 2015 because trust me, we don't want to cry about the 2 years in the county jail in slides. There's no sunshine, there's no outside. And this is a 5-star meal compared. This is a good meal though. This is this is a 20-star meal. But compared to those years in the county jail, it's all noodles. And so in 2015, I am awaiting sentencing. Part of the sentencing process is that a probation officer, they're in charge of sort of evaluating who you are as a person. And then they take that to the judge and they say, I've had a conversation with this young lady. This is who she is, and this is what I recommend. No prior record, a college education, married, divorced with a child, no high chance of recidivism. And that lady writes her report and recommends to the judge, according to the guidelines, that I receive 24 years in prison. And they hand me that paper while I'm in like a prison Bible study. Like here I am trying to get my mind right. And they knock on the door and they hand me this paper. They say 24 years. I politely fold it back up, slip it to the side, and I'm just kind of focused to the Bible study lady. I can't even process. And so that is where the blackmail comes in. So 24 years, the DA comes back a couple weeks later and they say, okay, well, she recommended 24 years. We will recommend to the judge 11 years if you appeal, if you sign off any rights to an appeal. And I had a really good shot at an appeal in court because the attorney that I paid my 40 grand to was really worth $4. And so I had a really good shot because there was lots of negligence. And the DA said, but we'll tell them 11 years. And so we went back and forth. And finally, I got them down to 8 years if you waive your rights to an appeal. 8 years sounded so much better than 24 years when you have a 4-year-old, now 6-year-old at home. And so I went ahead and folded. I was defeated and I had never felt defeat before in my life. And at that point, I'm just like, well, get ready. You're going to prison. And this is it. And so I waive my rights. The judge does me a favor and he takes off 10 months and I end up with 87 months. And for those of you who haven't done the math, that is 7 years and 3 months without any rights to an appeal, without ever asking anybody if they can help other than a clemency or a pardon from the President of the United States of America. And no matter what administration we have, I just don't think that a president has time to be concerned about the 1 or 2 folks, right, who are writing these petitions. And so I did it, and unfortunately, Obama declined it. And so I'm getting ready and I'm going to federal prison. So this is the part that will be unique for this conversation because I've had this conversation so many times, but I'm flying into Seattle yesterday. It's my first time here and I'm super stoked about the trees as I'm coming in, and I'm like looking out the plane and I can see the peak of a mountain. I flew in like right at sunset and I could see the peak of this mountain, and I'm just reflecting on its beauty and how flying has always been freedom for me. I've always loved to be on planes. It's always meant I was going somewhere, even if I weren't going far. And it took me back to this transport. So when they are transporting you from North Carolina, and I'm so excited to be coming closer to California, I don't realize what is ahead of me. And I realized on the plane yesterday that most people don't realize what transport looks like for a prisoner. And here I am, 28, 26, 20, I'm like 29 at the time. Same size, right? I'm a small person. And you are shackled at the ankles with about, I don't know, maybe a foot of chain. You are then handcuffed at the wrist. And then your wrists are connected to a chain at your waist. And that's how you're shuffled onto the plane in an unmarked airport. And for the first time in my life, I was like, my mom doesn't know where I'm at. Like she knows where I'm at, or like every step that I take, right? Like, mom, I'm at the hotel. Mom, I've landed. Mom. And it's not just me, right? There's vans that pull up of inmates, and they pull up to this plane, and there's armed guards. And at the time, insert a joke here. At the time, El Chapo had just sort of got picked up. And I was just like, where are my El Chapo friends? Like, why isn't someone coming to rescue me? But here we are, and they line you up and they shuffle you. And one of the girls who had done this before had said, Evelyn, put some Vaseline behind your ear. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? But I listened, because that's what you learn to do in jail, is listen to the tricks. And the Vaseline is just to get you through dry lips on this whole plane ride. That it's just the simple things. You're asked to eat a bologna sandwich with your hands still cuffed to your waist. And I'm one of those people, screw your meal, I'll just not eat this ride. But so last night's flight just sort of brought into perspective that I've come a long way, but that, thank you. Thank you. But that what once felt so freeing to me, that this war on cannabis stole that. And what I was never afraid to do, I had become afraid to do. And when I was asked to get on that plane again to be transported, I crumbled and begged, put me on a bus, put me on whatever you need to put me on. But the thought of being on a plane shackled, I couldn't handle it anymore. And so that's transportation. And so that's in 2015, I finally get moved closer to home, which is Victorville, in between Los Angeles and Vegas. It's the desert. I finally get to go outside for the first time. You would think that I just got to Disneyland, but it's prison inside of a prison. And this was a better prison. And I get there in July of 2015. And in August of 2015, my second mom, which is my dad's wife, since I was 3 years old. So I say second mom, but really mom, I just can't disrespect the mom that knows that I'm here today. But my second mom gets sick, and within 4 weeks, she's gone. And I'm in jail, and I still have to show up to my 12-cent a day job and not be able to go to her funeral, not be able to be at her bedside, not be able to take her to her chemo. And that's when I knew, if I hadn't known before, that prison took something from me that I would never in my life be able to recoup. I mean, for goodness sake, I'm able to still show up to my daughter's games and do all of those things that they took for those years. But to not be able to lay the lady who had raised me to rest I had finally broken. And so that was it. After that, it was all crochet. I just crocheted and played cards and ate food. My coping mechanism is to cut off. I'm very good at it. I'm in the process of doing that with someone now. We just cut off and you're done. And so I learned that in prison. And so I cut off from the outside world and just finished the rest of my prison term. I was eventually shipped to Arizona to complete the residential drug program, because if you were convicted for weed and you smoked weed, you are also an addict and you qualify for the drug program. So hello. My name is Evelyn LaChapelle and I'm an addict. And because that gets you a year off of your sentence. And so there are no lighter sentences for those who have never got in trouble, but there are lighter sentences for those who have abused drugs and can contest that they have abused drugs. And so I went through the program, very helpful program. I think it should be in all high schools. How do you communicate, all of these life skills. So I complete that. I get a year off. I'm also an outstanding inmate. And so I get another year off. And so I end up serving a total of 5 years and 3 months in prison. I'm released February 2019. So 2013, 2019, I'm in prison. One more thing to insert in the timeline is that when the state of California legalizes recreationally in 2016 or 17, I'm in prison and I'm watching it. And I'm watching it in a TV room with another inmate, Stephanie, and the news pops up and it's the Beverly Hills Cannabis Club, 2 pretty blonde hair, blue-eyed ladies, beautiful ladies. And they asked them, how's business doing? And they said, business is booming. And I'm serving a 7-year sentence. Stephanie is serving a 10-year sentence, both nonviolent cannabis offenders. And this lady is telling us business is booming and nobody even knows that we're in prison. No one cares that we're in prison. No one's, I wrote letters. I'm writing letters to Oprah, Ellen. I'm writing letters like all day long, like somebody please hear me. And no one heard me. And so I'm released in 2019, not because I got any time off, not because any laws changed, but simply because I served my time. I come home. I have no intention of doing this. I have no intention of smoking weed, looking at weed. I don't want to smell weed. If nothing else, the federal prison system had done its job and convinced me that A, what I had done was terribly wrong, and B, don't do it again. And so I had no intentions of doing it. What I was doing prior to being incarcerated, I was a sales and catering coordinator for the Oakland Marriott. My intentions was to climb that hospitality ladder and just mind my own little business. So I came home and I did exactly that. I was immediately hired at the Omni Hotel in San Francisco, which for me was like that's the Omni, right? Like I am doing it. If you ever watch Oprah, at the end of Oprah, it says all of her guests are staying at the Omni. So this was like, for me, I have made it. And I'm on the job for almost 2 months before I'm called into HR and someone had Googled my name, shared it with human resources. And the lady asked me to go to my desk and pack up my belongings on the spot. I guess that was defeat number 2. I'm going to stop counting. I thought I only had 1, but that was number 2. And so I did. I packed up my belongings as peacefully as possible and left the building and had thought 2 things. A, I'll be a waitress for the rest of my life. I'm pretty good at that. And B, if I knew any criminals or if I had any like criminal activity in the back of my pocket, I would have to feed my child somehow. I just didn't have it. And so that let me know that the recidivism rate is not because folks are coming home and looking to be criminals. I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure that I'm sure that there are some, but the fact is there are no reentry programming. There is no second chances really being given. And the fact that I had been on the job, doing the job, had been qualified for the job. I have a business degree from Loyola Marymount, for crying out loud. And I was asked to leave the building. I knew that this was going to be an uphill battle. So I go waitress. Shortly after that, I'm introduced to Last Prisoner Project, a great organization that is at the very least, they're doing a lot, but at the very, very least have introduced this conversation to the industry. I sat down with Steve D'Angelo for the first time and shared my story very much like I am doing here today. And in sharing my story, realized that the young girl that was in prison who was unheard finally has a voice. And every time that I'm able to share my story, I'm able to therapeutically release some of it. So thank you, therapist. And so from Last Prisoner Project, I'm introduced to Virtosa, which is one of the leading infusion brands out of California. And they offer me my first job in the legal industry, in the regulated industry, as their community engagement manager. Sounds good, but remember, I got out at 19. So this is now November when I get hired, and then COVID hits. And then there's nowhere else to community engage. But it worked, because out of COVID was born 87 and the Wee Lady, because I had spent so much time advocating for the incarcerated, so much time attaching my face and my name to other organizations, that I had not been able to stop and create something for folks to support me, for folks to support the folks like my mother, my daughter, those who had to ride with me during this journey. This is not a one-man journey. This is not a one-man show. I think so often we forget that when one person goes to prison, they're leaving a family behind. And it's so much more with women. There's a lot of men in prison that needs to be addressed, but women incarceration is never addressed. And when you imprison a woman, you are literally dismantling the entire family. And I was so blessed to have my mom and my stepmom, but there are so many women who don't have that. And so 87 was created to advocate for those women. And the Wee Lady was created to bridge a gap between legacy and regulated, the legacy and regulated industry. So there's a couple things that I know from this industry. These are the things that I took notes on last night while I was preparing. But what I know about this industry is there are still people in prison. Lots of people don't know that. Lots of people think that when it was legalized, it was decriminalized. When cannabis went up on the shelves, that people were let out of prison. My co-defendant, Parker Coleman, right now is serving a 60-year prison sentence for this plant. He was 19 when he went in. He's done 10 years. He's in one of the most dangerous USPs in this country. You don't make it out of those prisons as a good standing inmate. You have to survive. I've been on the phone. I've heard, I don't mean like it's lunch. I hope you guys are done eating, but I've been on the phone and I've heard the violence in the background. I've heard the crackdowns. I've heard the devastation. I've heard someone being stabbed over getting cut in the line, and Parker Coleman is sitting there because of his participation in distributing cannabis from California to North Carolina. And so I know that this is something that I know for a fact. I know that this industry will need to be intentional. I have good faith in the industry. I have more faith in the industry than I do in the law and in the government. And so this industry will need to be intentional about the way that it moves forward. And I know that the rebranding of cannabis has left weed criminalized and cannabis decriminalized. And so recently I launched a Weed is Not a Crime campaign in my city, Oakland, California, I put up billboards across the city. It did not go well. They moved them. I mean, it was a thing. Like at the last minute, I spent $6,000 to get these billboards up. And all of a sudden, the day before they go up, someone from higher up has decided that they needed to be moved. Now, I don't sell weed, so it's not a weed marketing issue. It's the fact that the billboard said weed is not a crime. And I was tasked with the option for it to say cannabis is not a crime or weed is not a crime. And I decided to move back to weed because in my communities, it's weed. And in my communities where people look like me, it's weed. So why do I need to rebrand that for it to not be a crime anymore? And it's the same plant. Thank you. And so those billboards just came down, but they're going back up. Maybe in a different neighborhood. So it's not all bleak. I have been in the industry for 3 years now advocating, and I've taken some notes on what I think that we all have the authority to do and can do. One, we need to normalize recreational cannabis use. My favorite meme, it says, everyone consumes for medicinal purposes, whether they know it or not. And I think that's true, right? I never realized how much I consume because of my anxiety or because of my stress level or because of all these other things. But not everyone knows that. And so there's a huge market of people who consume because they don't like liquor, because they want to go out, because they want to have a good time. And this industry has done a lot to normalize cannabis for wellness, but not cannabis for fun. And that is what is continuing to draw a line between what looks like legal cannabis and what looks like illegal cannabis, because the people who are doing it to have fun there's still a stigma attached to that. We can also incubators. I'm a huge fan. I don't know if you're familiar with Ease, but I was one of Ease's 10 incubators this last cohort. It came with a $50,000 grant where those billboards came from. And but I learned a lot. There's a knowledge gap. I don't think there's a lack of sophistication in the legacy industry, but there is a knowledge gap, and not knowledge about how to grow and sell weed. I mean, let's be honest, we've been doing this for years and years. Those dime bags in the bodega didn't get there because someone didn't know how to grow and sell weed. That we've been growing and selling weed for a long, long time. But the knowledge gap is in, how do you get investors to invest? How do you apply for a license? I've been in this industry for 3 years. On Friday, I just had someone hold my hand through becoming a social equity qualified applicant. It took 3 years for somebody to hold my hand. And I found out that the application literally was like, do you have a utility bill, a driver's license, and go get live scanned? It took me a day. Like, what? Like, that should come in like a packet. Like, hey, you just got out of jail. Here's the packet of information. I honestly thought it was like this whole thing. And he stops me and he's like, yeah, just give me this utility bill, go file it at the county office, do your live scan, and your application is in. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I think we could do better at bridging the knowledge gap. It was spoke on the panel before me, hire legacy cannabis operators, and not just as bud tenders. There is value in our voices. We've been cultivating, we've been selling, we know where the markets are, we know who's buying, we know what they like, we know how they like to consume it. Hire and give them a seat at the table. And if it's, and I've been community engaging now for a few different organizations, it's not an easy task. You have to be intentional about where you're hiring, where you're pulling your hiring pull from. It can't be your friends. Like, I know we always like to plug our friends, but in this case, there are people who have information, there are people who belong in this industry, and hiring needs to be a priority. If you're not familiar, there's an upcoming legacy brand, 40 Tons. They do cannabis career conferences. I've attended 2, and they pull out the community. I've gone to these career conferences and people are lined around the door because they want to be in the industry. They don't know how. And so if you don't know how to hire, become a part of one of those organizations that's helping you do that. And to the cultivators, use your crop to white label. Like, it took me too long to figure out that without having a license, I could still have weed on the shelves. It's not that hard. I don't know how Seattle works, but in California, I don't need a license. I just need to find a cultivator who's licensed, and I can sell my licensing and my branding, and I can have weed. Same here. I can have weed on the shelves across the country without one single license, and that can fall on the cultivators. Cultivators are selling their weed to the big brands who can buy it. You could be selling your weed to the legacy brands who know how to sell it. We've been selling weed. This is not new to us. I know, and which is where the weed lady came from, because prior to going into the dispensary, we were all calling the weed man. I tried in college. I smoked too much to sell it. So I literally sold like 2 dime bags, and that was it. So how do I do my part? I'll wrap up here. So I do my part with making sure that I interchangeably use the word weed and cannabis, and remind folks that weed is not a crime everywhere I go. I normally introduce myself. Hi, I'm Evelyn. I just got out of prison, because it's a shock, and people are intrigued, and they just don't know. And I don't do that for me. I do that for Parker Coleman. And I do that for the other 40,000 who are still in. When I walk into the dispensaries, hi, did you know that people are still in jail for that? So have the conversations, because conversations going viral is a thing. Thank you. And so that's one place to start is weed is not a crime. Start having those conversations. Every purchase from my store, calltheweedlady.com, 87 cents from every unit sold goes to support Women's Prison Association, the longest standing women's association that supports reentry for women. I had to go all the way to New York to find that organization, and I'm in California. So that lets you know that there's not that many. And so every donation that I make to them is going to support women housing, therapy. They do tattoo removal. Most women are in prison because they loved a man that did them wrong. I think a lot of us can relate to that, not the prison part, but the man and the love wronged. And so that makes women incarceration a little deeper, right? Because there's therapy that needs to be involved. There's family court that needs to be involved. Right now, in most states, if you have lost custody of your child and you test positive for cannabis, you are done. You are still not getting your children back. And not to mention that parenting without cannabis should be like illegal. Those are all the moms. Who in here has a teenager? Listen, I've got a 13-year-old, and I'm like, Mom, I appreciate you having her when she was 3, but the 13-year-old, like, I cannot, like, she just closed the door on me. So I'm also doing live conversations. What I love most about my live on Instagram, Trey, I think you've been on there. What I love most about my live conversation is that I get to interview folks in this industry and talk about, why do you consume? What was the first time you consumed? What are you doing in this industry? And what is most important to me is taking those conversations out of this room, although I know we all love the plant, but into the rooms of the people who are just unknowing. A big part of what I'm creating with 87 and the Weed Lady is taking the Weed Lady into non-cannabis friendly environments. I have a salon, and so now it's a cannabis friendly salon. All I had to do was build a smoke session. Going into the clubs, like, there's still people who spend $1,000. Like, do you know it's about $1,500 to buy a bottle at a club? I've got friends who do it every weekend. $1,500 for bottle service every weekend. Everybody's in there smoking weed, but there's no cannabis brands to be seen. There's none. And so now the Weed Lady will be sponsoring some bottles in the club, right? So just taking this conversation into the public and into spaces that are not normally built. How often do we spend thousands to go to cannabis conferences to see the same people that we have seen over and over and over again? So why not take this to the next baseball game or the next football game? Why is Budweiser the only one getting any recognition during Super Bowl? Like, we're at home smoking weed. And cannabis beverage. I'll end here because I don't have a cannabis beverage yet, but it's coming, because I do believe that beverage is the way that we will normalize cannabis consumption. I'm not a drinker, although I've had many of those college nights drunk and hungover and sick. I really think I'm allergic to it. But I think that the alcohol industry is our leading competitor. And I think that if we normalize drinking cannabis, then we have an actual opportunity at taking this industry to the next level. And so I support all the new cannabis beverage brands coming on. Virtosa definitely led that information for me. And that's what's next. It's going to be an 87 Arnold Palmer, half iced tea, half lemonade, dosed at 10 milligrams. And it's coming as soon as I can get some funding. And so thank you. I think I've reached my 15. I appreciate you all. I did bring some goodies. So whoever has questions, I've got something for you. Thank you. I don't know that I've ever got a standing ovation. Thank you. Oh, please. So there's no sound? Okay, then we'll skip the video. If you go to calltheweedlady.com, you'll learn as much as you need. The sound is extremely important because it's just showing. The video was created to introduce Oakland. Oakland is where I'm from. Oakland is, we all know Oakland is synonymous for its weed, at least in other parts of the world. I know Seattle has some good weed too. But the point is that in my neighborhoods, people are still being criminalized to this day. The smell of marijuana can get you pulled over. And what they find after that is a whole nother ball game. It doesn't matter. But I have been operating in this industry now for 3 years, and cannabis brands are running from what it really looks like. We are running from it, and we're trying to make all of cannabis look like an Apple store, like Steve Jobs created it. And the truth is, he didn't. And the truth is, it was created in neighborhoods where folks were feeding those dime bags to those bodegas, and it fed families and it created some wealth, and that has been stolen. And we have all made it our mission to make it look as neutral as possible. And so my intent with my brand is to, for me, make it authentically Oakland, authentically myself, and to show what it looks like to enjoy weed. I do yoga, but I also enjoy weed on a Saturday night. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Got it? Okay. It scares me every time I see somebody coming down. Everybody, again, thank you, Evelyn.